Jesus is moving toward Jerusalem. He's approached early in chapter 11 with this request that Lazarus is ill, and yet he remained there for 2 more days. They just, if you would come on, Jesus, you can heal Lazarus, he'll be fixed, and we'll move on. And Jesus, doing Jesus things in Jesus' time, says, not yet, not yet. So he remained for 2 more days. The disciples really don't get what Jesus is saying, what Jesus is thinking, as always they have done in the Gospels, it seems. So Jesus says to them that Lazarus is sleeping, don't worry about it. And the disciples will said, well, if he's just sleeping, he'll wake up. He'll finish whenever the preacher gets through talking. He'll just wake up. And Jesus finally, he's been with them for 3 years in John, and he says, y'all just don't get it. He is dead. So you can understand for sure what's going on. There are a couple of places in Scripture where there's a response given by people, and sometimes the scholars tell you that, well, it's kind of being flippant or they're making it. So some commentators said that Thomas's response is really just kind of him being, kind of callous and not really worried about that. It's like, yeah, well, let's us go too, and we can die with Lazarus. I don't really think that's true. That's not what I hear and not what it's in my heart. The scholars can have the argument if they want it. But I think perhaps, somehow Thomas is finally getting what Jesus is saying and says, well, we just left in chapter 10 with you about getting stoned. So, and you're ready to head back to Jerusalem, right? Okay, so this is probably not going to work out too good for us. But it's okay because you're going with us and we're following after you. Whatever happens, you're there in the midst of it. That's the way I take it. He's willing really just to go ahead and die with Lazarus and Jesus, even if he has to. That's just what it is, and that's where he is in life and in faith. They arrive at Martha, and she runs out to talk to him, drops and says, if only you had been here, Lazarus would not have died. Now that's a pretty big pronouncement of faith. If you had been here, he would still be alive. But Jesus is saying, more to her, that even with death, Jesus is about to do a new thing. As we often hear this verse from funerals, almost every funeral that I've ever been a part of, somewhere this is worked in. Jesus' response to her, I am the resurrection and the life. Those who believe in me, even though they die, will live. And everyone who lives and believes in me will never die. And Jesus looks at her and says, do you believe this? One commentator made a huge argument about this and discussion about this. He didn't ask her, do you understand what I'm saying? He said, do you believe? Perhaps the argument is that understanding isn't necessarily prerequisite for believing. That we can even believe things we sometimes don't understand by trusting in who it's saying it and where it comes from. Yes, Lord, I believe that you are the Messiah, she pronounces. Mary's interaction with the text from today, with our text from today. Jesus is taken to the tomb, that they are weeping, he is weeping, the people who've gathered to weep are weeping, everybody's weeping. It's one of those kind of days. But Jesus wants to see what's going on because the greatness of God is about to be revealed. Some scholars actually suggested that this is, in the Gospel of John, Jesus' really Garden of Gethsemane moment. This angst and anxiety of what's going on. Perhaps he knows that he can heal Lazarus even after he has died 4 days later. In Jewish thought and understanding that the spirit remained around the body for 3 days, sort of. But the 4th day, he was dead. He was really dead. The old King James says, surely he stinketh. He's really dead. But Jesus knows that this is going to cost him. Put it this way, that if Lazarus comes out of the tomb, Jesus steps into the tomb. And this is the kind of the final twist in the life of Jesus that show the religious authorities and the Jewish leaders that Jesus can't keep going and doing this stuff. Somebody's got to stop him. But even 4 days later, Jesus was able to bring the life out of a situation of complete and total death. There's the faith. And he does it in front of so many people. It reveals the power of God and calls Lazarus to come forth. And Lazarus does. Unbind him and loose him. Everyone who was there saw it. I don't know, maybe there's just a little bit, the fact that so many people saw this resurrection of Lazarus, that it makes the Easter morning story of Jesus' resurrection all the more believable. That those who have gathered around, they saw it with their eyes and they knew what had happened. And so they gave witness to an event that we only understand as we go forward with the resurrection of Christ. But it says in the next verse after this pericope that many began to believe in Jesus as a result. Lazarus, who had been dead, is alive. And because of Jesus' ministry, he is unbound and let go. Many around them believed. I don't know, you know this. There's something about stars are brighter when the nights are darker. There's a little bit, these candles, they're great and everything, but in this, with our light in the sanctuary, you barely notice their light. But a small candle in the darkest of dark rooms on a dark night gives light to the whole room. Between the candle and our eyes adjusting, we can see a lot in that room that's pitch dark with just the smallest amount of light present. Doesn't take much, just a little bit. Makes all the difference in the world. Maybe that's just what we're supposed to hear about this transformation power of Jesus in seemingly hopeless situations. Still carries us through our days and through our dark nights. Maybe that question that Jesus asked, do you believe, is asked to us too. Do we believe? Do we believe in the promise and the understanding of who Christ is in the world, that God's Spirit enables us, that the power of the resurrection that has been preached and believed for centuries and understood to be very presence of the living Christ in our midst through the strength of the Spirit that nurtures and sustains us on our darkest days? That's the same God that we hear about in this story with Lazarus. Sometimes, and I think a lot of us are in this place right now, that the world seems like it's so chaotic that we just aren't sure which way to go. It's like a dizzy mess everywhere we look around. We don't know which way to turn, and we aren't really sure how to get our first step off. Just how is it? Which way to turn? What is it? What do we do? Kind of like Lazarus, sometimes we have to stand and stare at the stone that's in front of us. The thing that we are most uncertain about in the world, to stand at and look at the stones that are preventing life from happening. Oh, there's all kinds of challenges. You've got your own. I made a list, sorry. The first one I think is on many of our hearts is the election. It's coming, angst in a time of turmoil in the middle of our country or all throughout our country, where we're just not sure what's going to go next, how it's going to be, what's going on. And yet we know that no matter which side wins, we all have our prayers to be answered this week, that we continue to be the people of God for ourselves and for our world, and we seek to do better. Some of you have heard me say this more, that the Declaration of Independence is that we can form a more perfect union.
Wasn't perfect then, and it's not perfect now, and it's not going to be perfect tomorrow, but every day, hopefully, we're going to get a little better, a more perfect union. That's our prayer. The great economic disparity between those who have a whole lot and those who have nothing. And most of us in this room sit right in the middle of the world, and we are part of the wealthy. In our country, maybe not, but across the world, we too are included in that huge, richest part of the world. Even when we're not sure if we're going to have $5 or $10 at the end of the month after every bill gets paid. You have to take the good in that and just continue to hear God's call for us and the challenges to make sure that everybody has enough. In the church life, what's church look like post-COVID in the 21st century world is a question that everybody asks and everybody wonders. For those of us in this congregation, we also remember and give thanks for the St. Timothy's congregation that's come here and merged. That those who are left disaffiliated churches that have found a home and a place to worship here, that those who are just passing through, that all may come here to worship and to give God thanks for God's presence in our life. Just those general day-to-day stresses. The car needs oil changing. I've got to get gas. We've got to pay the bill. We just got to get the leaves up. I just got them up yesterday. They're already back. Those things that just constantly weigh on us. Our health, uncertainty of what the test result will be, where God is in that midst, and how we can be helped, and how we can see something better in that time, the uncertainty of that, recovering from surgeries or professional career. What's next in my life? Where do we all go and ask the question about professional questions that we merge? Our relationships, one between another person, family members, those who we love. Our wearying of life's constant grind day in and day out. And yet it doesn't matter if the stone that we see is this big, or is bigger than this whole room. That we know that the God that we worship and that we praise and that we serve cares for us and tells us that we are cared for, supports and sustains and loves us. Offers to us forgiveness and power that we don't have any understanding of. But we're not asked fully to understand, we're asked, do we believe? Yet we're reminded that we never, ever stand alone. That Jesus is there with us, the one who can give life even in the situations of death, is with us every single day, for this day and for all of eternity, never to leave us and forsake us. And that when we gather around this table as part of God's family, that we are nurtured and sustained by the gift of bread and juice, that the reminders of God's resurrection that the early disciples saw too. So we join with them and we claim that faith for ourselves and for our world. All glory, honor, and power be to the one who was, who is, and who is to come. Amen.